Hello, all, and welcome to this stream where I'm going to look at books 1 to 8 of the Iliad because I've been reading Chapman's Homer recently. And I want to divulge a little bit in a Carlylean sense. What sort of greatness have we seen in this first third? If you think of breaking the Iliad into 3 acts, you have books 1 to 8 being the first act. So we're an act in, and what sort of themes on greatness have we seen so far? Also, I've been going through Plutarch, and it's interesting to note that Homer was said to have written these around the 700, 750 BC in an ancient Greek, which was just emerging literarily out of the Bronze Age collapse. So, in terms of a Plutarchan sense, some of these heroes line up with Homer's telling lines up with when Plutarch seems to think Romulus was around, perhaps Lycurgus, Theseus. Theseus' myth was also forming in the oratory tradition around this time as well. So how do they line up in relation to what we've already seen and discussed with Plutarch? The Iliad, as well, we should note, is a single episode within the larger epic cycle. It's a window into the behavior of heroes at a crucial juncture in the war, and that crucial juncture is what lets us examine critical aspects of leadership and greatness in more of a microcosm than you would if you stared at the epic cycle as a whole. And really, this episode, the Iliad, will begin and is instigated by a quarrel between Achilles and Agamemnon. This is the background to this quarrel is what's set out in book 1, and then books 2 to 8, the remaining parts of what we'll refer to as Act 1 in this regard, kind of set the scene around the plain of Troy, establishes these modes of interference we can expect between man and man in combat, between God and man, between God and God. It really gives us an introduction to all the characters that we're going to have in this little episode, and an idea of where their fate and their faiths will be interacting with one another, and also their internal idea of virtue or valor on the battlefield or otherwise will come to the fore. From these more internal characteristics that we see fleshed out in books 1 to 8, we'll see more of a sort of plot narrative developing in the later ones. Now, in an introduction to the Ryu translation, which is the Penguin Classics translation you can find in most good bookstores, there is a talk about what are the themes, what are the historicity of this, and I picked up some points from this introduction. It was interesting to note how he does call it out. Now, a part of the preface as well was written in the late 40s, early 50s, so we're talking around the same time Gilbert Hyatt penned its classical tradition. Now, it states in that introduction that we're dealing with particularly aristocratic heroics, which is quite different to what you would expect to be venerated today, but also quite different to the Carlylean sense. Of course, Carlyle has, in his lectures on hero and hero worship, dealt with men who came almost out of nowhere to seize a people and a time and an epoch and shape it around themselves, without this idea that they were inherited to do so. You could not foresee that they would be the ones to be vaulted or venerated as hero, but rather that there seemed to be something a bit more spiritual involved, something a bit more mystical. Here we have a bit more aristocrats as heroics, or proto-aristocrats, of course, because we are still very much in a Bronze Age environment. But we can see, in a Carlylean sense, what this plain of Troy, this battlefield before the gates of Troy, does to men, even with the aristocratic heroes in mind. It's kind of an equalizing piece of geography and circumstance, where we have both men on the both sets of men on either side worshiping the same gods, fighting for the similar ideals. It is less one force against a foreign foe, as is told, for instance, in the Song of Roland, where the fight is against the barbaric Moors, or it is certainly people who are deemed to be barbarous or foreign. Aristocrats, unlike on a normal scrap, or even to its lowest level of battle, the pub brawl, they have rules of combat and hospitality. Okay, so and noticeably this is broken by Paris, which has set up the entire epic cycle, rather than the discussion between the quarrel rather between Achilles and Agamemnon, which sets off this episode that Homer wants to tell of the epic cycle. But that leads to questions. You have rules in combat, so rules of combat, rules of hospitality. This leads to the question: how should a king divide up his spoils in war? How does a man achieve Kleos, a sort of Greek word for fame after death? How can a man perform battles so that even the gods can weep? And all of these are what should be in people's minds as they enter into a reading upon the Iliad. A note on the historicity: there's a channel called Apostolic Majesty, who did a recent stream on the historicity of the Homeric epics, which was very entertaining, very engaging, and immersive on the historicity of the Homeric epics. There is a note in this introduction of Ryu, the Penguin Classics one, on this historicity. It is an epic poetry was handed down by oral poets from as early as late Bronze Age Greek, the so-called Mycenaean Age, which ended circa 1100 BC. Homeric epic, in fact, contains no historical understanding of the Mycenaean world at all. We do see comparisons to the Babylonian epic, but the Iliad really is much more the creation of contemporary and near contemporary 8th century BC culture, which has been blurred by the generations from that earlier Mycenaean age. And then we also had the unearthing of Schliemann's excavations of Troy in the late 19th century, which led back to this idea that, as a matter of fact, there was this genuine Troy. It was not just this fable, because you see throughout the centuries this flipping from how much of it was bedded in an actual reality, how much of it was pure mythos. The same similar discussion happens in the case of Homer himself. Was he an actual man who lived and breathed? Is he a symbol of rhapsodes more generally that existed at this time? But I'll leave that for elsewhere, because I mainly want to focus on the aspects of heroism and go through the book by book as we see it. There is an ancient belief that the battlefield, although a plain in this case, exposes man to two parts of nature: the beast, but also the god that is sort of above. And now this is a pagan mythos, so the gods that are above the plain and working above this level of skirmish. So when you engage in the battle, you can reveal yourself to be beast, or you can reveal yourself to be in search of Kleos, in search of that everlasting fame. And that is certainly what Achilles is after. And in this, I was recently rewatching parts of Hollywood's rendition of Troy, which is I hadn't seen since I was a boy, and it was truly awful in comparison to reading the Iliad. Very clunky dialogue as well. Parts where, if you're reading through Homer's dialogue, it supersedes the Hollywood dialogue. So it's very strange that they did not even sample out of some of these translations people have done, the likes of Ryu, the likes of Samuel Butler, even the likes of Chapman. But such was the production. The plain then itself emerges as both a leveler, because the stakes are so high that you can die. You can be an aristocratic hero and still meet the ultimate fate of death, which is the same as anyone else on that battlefield. It can be a great leveler, especially if everyone turns to beasts, but it can also be a sort of a bifurcator of people. because though some will be able to attain that Kleos, some will be able to ascend in a spiritual way that others will not. So when we get on to book 1, and I'll just share my screen because I've got some of the translations I want to share with you. And here is the art. Some art they have in the Met. I mean, here's Paris, for instance. We'll get onto his decadent nature when we reach book 3. But let's look at book 1. And if you're ever wanting to read certain translations, get to grips with what the Greek meaning was, I recommend this site, Perseus Tufts. You simply, once you get to the Homer Iliad, I'm in a hopper text there, as you can see. You have the table of contents, you have all your lines. Now, if you have a Penguin Classics Ryu, it will give you the line of the plate, the original plating. So, for instance, we're in 285 here of book 1. You will be able to tell in your Penguin Classics, no matter what page you are on your Penguin publication, you will know you're in line 285 of book 1 according to this plating system. And then using that plating system, you will be able to find all of the lines from books 1 to 24 online here. This translation is the one I believe you find. Now, they have a few. Okay, so you can see here, this is the translation by A.T. Murray. That's the one you find in the Harvard Press parallel text version. If you think of the green hardback books you may have seen in the bookshop. If you go on here, you can find, first of all, it's interesting, you're able to compare Murray's translation against your own one, for instance, the Ryu Penguin Classics translation. And then if you'll have a panel Greek, and it'll be either in a hide or a load. If you hit load, it's an out show. It comes hide show. Once you hit load, you'll be able to see the actual ancient Greek. And then if you click on any of these words, it'll open up in a new tab for you this meaning of the word, how many times it occurred, what type of the word it is. For instance, is it the third plural, imperfect, if it's a verb, and so on. So it gives you a great understanding of what the actual word is, what the translator was getting behind. Certain passages might strike you, and I find it engaging to use this technique. So I've done it with a few of the lines that we'll get to in a bit. Now, the first one I want to get to is around this part here, book 1. And we're about line 285. The first word that sparked this off, we said, was this debate between this quarrel between Achilles and Agamemnon. But people often call this, this is all about the rage of Achilles in relation to that quarrel, that his prized possession, Perseus, is taken from him, and out of this difference in understanding between what can be taken and what can't in the spoils of war, what can be taken from a man's tent, what is owed to the king, is what sparks off the debacle. And this rage of Achilles, this untaming anger of Achilles, is what leads to many of the events that unfold. But just a few lines later, once we get past the famous first lines, anger sin goddess, anger of Achilles and of Peleus, which is Menelaus thea Peleio Achilles, the famous lines, we do reach about line 20 when they wanted to see the priests respected and splendid, ransom taken, but this was not at all to Agamemnon's liking. He cruelly and bluntly dismissed the priest. Agamemnon only takes Perseus from Achilles because he is first has taken a daughter of this priest, and the priest wants the daughter back. And what happens is he is seen to have maltreated, right? That is the word, maltreat this priest. And the Greek for that is kakous, which I hopefully have up here. I may have gone past it myself, but I did use the same system as before. It's kakous, which means to maltreat, but that's an interesting word. We're talking about heroes and how they should behave. Agamemnon as king is seen to have maltreated, or kakous, of this priest, so it's almost a maltreatment of a spiritual nature. And he shows a lack of respect for his men in the conduct of war. That sparks it off as much as any rage of Achilles. This is the instigator. The kakous is the instigator. And the priest, of course, can invocate from the gods. From this doubt raised among the men of whether Agamemnon is genuinely acting as a king or a leader. Remember, we're meant to be 9 years into this siege, this 10-year siege. That's where the doubt comes. That's where Achilles' rage comes from. And you see on lines 90 and indeed 30 and 130. So on lines 90, not even if the man you mean is Agamemnon, this is Achilles' reply, who now claims to be far the best of all. So that is Achilles begins to only see Agamemnon as a claimant to this idea of the king and leader, of this king of kings in this expedition against Troy. Agamemnon replied and said, "You are a great warrior, god like Achilles, but don't imagine you can trick me into that." This is the bartering of what should be owed to each other. Should he take the woman Perseus from Achilles, or should he be giving the original daughter back to the priest? Don't imagine you can trick me into that. I'm not going to be outmaneuvered or persuaded by you. We see here an insight into the difference between the two men. Achilles is the one who wants to claim the Kleos. And we'll just get some of our ancient Greek art here to look at in the meantime. But Achilles is the one who wants the Kleos. He wants this fame in battle. Agamemnon has to deal with more a managerial task, as well as this idea of wanting wealth from Troy, wanting Kleos as well, perhaps. In the film, that Hollywood film that they do, Agamemnon is seen to be much older than Achilles and is this very petty man. He simply wants to get Troy, the riches of Troy. He's after this very abstract idea of power in an earthly dominion. One of the very few things that 2004 Troy film does is show Achilles wanting to attain above the level of materiality. Everyone else is very much a material man, Agamemnon in particular. Agamemnon in the actual Iliad is tempted by these things, but I don't believe he genuinely is wholly made of material interests. He's having to actually, in the reality of the siege, juggle Achilles' want with the wants of other men, with the idea that he needs to be seen to get the greatest prize so that he keeps his authority and his hold on the power, so we don't develop into a chaotic disformation of the Greek armies. Now, Achilles, he recognizes as a superior fighter, but he seems more impulsive. And they have this war of words, this machasamenu, coming from the machamai, the Greek machamai, to fight. Agamemnon, also on the other hand, he has people like Nestor, the great advisor. And so if we go to some of Nestor's lines in book 1 as an introduction to the idea of what Agamemnon has around him. Agamemnon, cool your fury. I, Nestor, entreat you to put aside your anger against Achilles, who's a mighty tower of strength for every Greek in the hell of battle. Nestor has wisdom and experience and needs to be leaned on in the same way Agamemnon in turn will lean on to others who have such a thing. He will quarrel with Achilles, but he has to lean on the wisdom and words of Nestor. Achilles is much more solo actor in all of this. Again, highlighting the difference between the two men. So we have hierarchy, and we can see that in the differences between Achilles, the lone actor, and Agamemnon, who has to work much more inside the rigid bounds of the army system, or this proto system that we have in the Bronze Age. There's hierarchy also among the gods. We have Achilles goes and gives out about the situation to his mother, Thetis, who then goes to Zeus. So you have this hierarchical development of the gods. From Achilles, this demigod, gives out and goes to his mother Thetis, and then Thetis goes on to Zeus in this plea to help Achilles or to hinder the Greeks ultimately, because Agamemnon sees to become symbolic of the entire Greek army. You can think about whether that's a justified leap of logic there yourself. But we do have in Agamemnon, at the close of book 1, this strange, almost Promethean-like invocation of fury of the gods. Young Greek warriors sang and danced to appease the god with a beautiful hymn celebrating to Archer Apollo. But there is a god-invoking fury passage from Agamemnon around the same time, which is strange and possibly should lead to the gods wanting to actually invoke a little bit of retribution upon Agamemnon more than they would an Achilles, because having already stated earlier, it's not as simple as Achilles simply wanting his prize Briseis, and being justified in it. Agamemnon has to weigh up the balance of him looking powerful in the eyes of the entire army against this fighter Achilles. He probably feels threatened by Achilles. He's the more skilled fighter, but he is not by any means a more skilled organizer of men. And so we really pass on then to book 2. And it starts off with this destructive dream Agamemnon has. The destructive dream in epic storytelling recurs again and again. I was reading the Song of Roland at the same time I was reading this passage, and I did note that there is this dream of Charlemagne that he will lose his greatest commander, Roland, in this upcoming skirmish against the Moors or the Saracens, I believe. I can't remember exactly how they're described. It's a muddled form in that Dark Age epic, the Song of Roland. But again, this idea of the destructive dream begins, and it plagues Agamemnon's mind as we set sail. Book 2 is all about lining up to the catalogue of the ships, which gives us a great list of everyone who sailed for Greece against the Trojans. But it starts off with Agamemnon having this idea of the destructive dream. And I think that's an interesting point in when we are pondering the decision-making of the greats in this epic, that if you're ever writing an epic of yourself, that is a great tool, this destructive dream. And we're also, of course, inside the harshness of a 9-year siege. And if we look at lines 170, grey-eyed Athene went up to him and said, Olympian-born son of Laertes, resourceful Odysseus, you're all going to run off like this, falling aboard your many benched ships to get home to the lands of your fathers, and leaving Helen here for Priam and the Trojans to boast about. So there's this, before they set sail to Troy, ultimately, there's this almost route where they go, fuck it, we've been at this for 9 years, let's go home. And it's up to men like Odysseus to quell that route. So don't leave with your tail between your legs. The masses always will want home. This is a mistake Agamemnon says when he tries to rally them in an incorrect manner. It's up to Odysseus then and men like this, Ajax and so on, to rally them back to make sure they don't fly home to their wives. So again, is this a mistake by Agamemnon and his greatness? He revealed too much of his dream, the tormented dream, and that brought doubt to the lower rankings, right? The lower masses of men. So it's up to, again, heroes such as Odysseus to bring it back. But ultimately, by about line 390 of book 2, we see Agamemnon getting over the quarrel with Achilles before Achilles himself. And that's, again, where I start to turn around and get more in tune with Agamemnon's struggle at this time than Achilles' one, because Achilles stays moping until we reach Act 2 by book 9. Agamemnon, by this point, has kind of gotten over it. He's seen the whole panic. He's had this destructive dream, and there's this mini rout. It's quelled. We have the catalogue of the ships. By this time, Agamemnon's over it and moving back. His idea now is fixed on battle, fixed on the task at hand, which is taking Troy, whereas Achilles is still moping around. And then we have the catalogue of the ships. And it's interesting, we have a lot of people. We have people like Philoctetes, these nuggets of mythos for later authors to give. Of course, Sophocles will take up that theme of Philoctetes. It's just mentioned as a passing, as a one man who sailed and was already left behind on an island at this point. But when we get to the Myrmidons, which are Achilles' men, it is said, and again using the Rio translation, they were called Myrmidons, Hellenes, and Achaeans. Achilles led their 50 ships. But at this time, they had forgotten the sound and fury of war. And that's where we get this translation, the sound and fury of war. And if I look into, this happens in book 2, just short of line 690. You can see this is how I used this Perseus Tufts before. You go to book 2, you go to lines just before 690 is involved. And we can see here is Murray's translation of the same thing. Of the 50 ships, these men was Achilles' captain. Howbeit, they bethought them not of dolorous war, since there was no man to lead them forth into the ranks. So not quite a sound and fury of war there, but a dolorous war. So perhaps if we go into the ancient Greek, we won't find the perfect translation for that we would have found originally reading Ryu. And I believe, again, this is where we're getting words like machasamenu, the words around, I think, machismo, right? Or mach meaning battle. In book 3 is where we're first given an insight into the Trojans. And it's going to be all about the battle between Menelaus, who's lost Helen, to Paris, who is Helen, now Helen of Troy's elopee. I'm not sure which way that should go. Yeah, eloper, let's say. And immediately I'm struck by this. Again, we're talking about leadership and greatness. How are people shown to be great in the Iliad books 1 to 8? Menelaus here is described as warlike against Paris. Paris has the feeble battle. He has to be saved by a mist, which is brought on by Aphrodite out of pity for him. So in comparison to this warlike Menelaus, right, we have a decadent Paris, and that's in book 3, line 38. It's issued in mockingly towards Paris, but the Trojans are too soft. Otherwise, you would have been stoned to death long before the troubles you have caused. You're too soft. And again, this is where, if you're reading these translations, you're looking for a greater understanding of what's behind the scene here. We go to book 3. I can close these down because I've used them. We go to book 3 here. And I know by looking at the platings, we're just before line 60. So we can see 60 here, and it's being ushered to Paris, or to Alexander. Nay, verily, the Trojans are utter cowards, else wouldst thou ere this have donned a coat of stone by reason of all the evil thou hast wrought. And then we look here, just after him, and to him did godlike Alexander make answer, saying, so we can immediately see this is a break. This is the paragraph break here. Tondote prosipen Alexandros. So you can spot names quite quickly as well, even if you're not fluent in the Greek. This is Alexandros. If you know the alphabet, you can spot that quite quickly. So the meanings occur just above it, where we want to get the understanding of what's this Greek word for being soft or decadent? And is it one that we can use? Again, we have kakun. Think of kakus that we had around the priest, the maltreating of the priest. But I believe the word we're looking for here is, you see here, this is Troyes. So this is Troy, and Troyes Dedimones. And then if I click on that, it'll open up into a new tab, and it'll give us the meaning of it. Dedimon, fearful or cowardly. So we have some words like kakus, to maltreat, almost on a spiritual level. This is a poor thing for a leader to do. This is what Agamemnon does to the priest. And then on the other hand, if you're warlike like Menelaus, you will want to go up against somebody who is more of this mones, fearful and cowardly. That's Paris. And also, actually, just a bit lines later, there's this linkage of the wealth of Troy with this decadence. Does this unending luxury, which is the riches of Troy, which are so tempting to Agamemnon, are these which led to Paris to be in the situation in the first place? Does the riches lead to the decadence? And there's a line on 200 when they're describing Odysseus. He's almost getting slagged. He's getting jested and jibed at for being basically a sheep herder on rough Ithaca, right? What is Ithaca to Troy? But Helen, when she's describing to Priam who all these leaders are, she says, that is quick-thinking Odysseus, son of Laertes. He was brought up on Ithaca, a rugged island, and is master of all kinds of maneuvers and strategies. And of course, we know that the Trojan horse and the ultimate fate of Troy lies in such strategies and cunning. So it is the man from rugged Ithaca. It's still a leader, an aristocratic leader. He is son of Laertes. His history, his past matters. But nevertheless, it will be himself, not someone from adorned in the jewels and over gleaming wealth of Paris, or someone. Paris will give you the love of Aphrodite. She might save you in a mist from a more warlike man, but this will not ultimately save your town from utter destruction. From the people of cunning like Odysseus, who's more rooted in his being. Now, this is that whole idea of Odysseus being so rooted to Ithaca that he is the man of the Odyssey, the hero of the Odyssey, who has to go back home. Such are his roots there. In book 4, because of this whole duel between Menelaus and Paris, we have the breaking of the truce and the resume of battle. Menelaus almost dies, but he's basically survived because the arrow pierces a piece of armor that is just below, I believe, a part where it is called vital, or basically a part which would have killed him. Put your mind at rest and don't alarm the men. The sharp arrow did not reach a vital spot. This sort of passage here, where Menelaus is almost killed and Agamemnon comes to rush into his aid, is a passage. I believe that when I was reading the Chapman lines of this in book 4, I found them quite engaging and endearing. It's the other side of Agamemnon. Agamemnon has to show himself to the troops to be this great warlord, a king of kings, a man who will take his prizes and not question his own actions. He needs to be seen as decisive. But when his brother Menelaus is struck down and almost killed, we see the more caring man. And we also see a little bit of rage, a little bit of minion in Agamemnon too, because he utters that he will absolutely tear down Troy. He will level it, because at this point he believes that his brother Menelaus has been killed. So again, it's the fleshing out of the character of Agamemnon. On the one hand, he is the leader of men. He must take Perseus from Achilles. On the other, he will weep for his brother, even on the battlefield. That will overcome some of his other instincts to lead. But he follows that with a rally when he realizes Menelaus is not going to die. There's a talk to the generals. Just, you can see again that if the piercing of Menelaus's armor and is close to death, it almost hit a vital spot, but actually he saved. That can be. We're talking about the first book of Western literature here. That could be seen as a trope. Think of where Tolkien has Frodo in Moria, and there's almost the death there by cave troll. This can go all the way back to the Menelaus scene in book 4, or just after when he rallies the troops. My mind goes to Shakespeare's Henry V. You would not see godlike Agamemnon dozing or hiding or unwilling to fight, but eager for battle where men win glory. Similar to that Henry in Henry V's invocation of, we would think ourselves blessed that we're not at home in England. But there is also, of course, Nestor's words of wisdom behind everything. Don't let anyone drop behind or weaken the whole force, says Nestor as they rejoin the battle. We also have descriptions of ornate armor against vivid gore. It's again this idea that we talked about when we were talking about the preamble to Book 1. The bifurcation which can happen on the plain of Troy, on the battlefield. You can ascend into the manner of the gods, it's Kleos, or you can become entirely bestial. And then this is seen in the juxtaposition of the ornate armor and then the vivid descriptions of gore and flesh and innards coming out of men almost through that armor. It is the piercing of the facade. If your armor is pierced, it's the piercing of that facade. This ornate armor is desecrated. And then the revelation of who you are, these blood and guts come through. So there's some good descriptions there in Book 4. Book 5, we have this character Diomedes and his heroics. It's the elevation of that. We talked about the ascendancy, the one for Kleos. It's the elevation of that to a level of hubris, because ultimately Diomedes will try and take on a god himself. It starts by him killing Pandarus at around line 140. And then around line 295 is when we actually get the lines of Pandarus dying. And the quote from Ryu is that his life and spirit left him. This is the description of the death of Pandarus by the feet of Diomedes. He crashed out of the chariot. His bright glittering armor clattered about him, and his swift horses shied away. Life and spirit left him there. And again, this is one of those passages where I again wanted to go to Perseus Tufts. His life and spirit left him. So again, we've had Kakus, this idea of maltreatment, the priest. We had already, I'm forgetting it, Daemon, this fearful, cowardly. These are the words described like a decadent Trojan, like Paris. And then ultimately around, you can see here I'm in Homer's Iliad, 5-280. Same method as before of finding this online. And I can see we're just short of 300. What will Murray's translation be? Over him he stood like a lion, confident in strength, and before him he killed his spear, and his shield was well balanced on. It's actually a little bit before that, because that's the reaction of Aeneas to the death of his friend Pandarus. These are the lines here, where he fell from his chariot. Then he fell from out the car, and its armor all bright and flashing clanged upon him, and the swift-footed horses swerved aside, and there his spirit and his strength were undone. So there his spirit and his strength were undone. That, for me, does read similar to the Ryu translation. Life and spirit left him there. So we can have something here about looking for translations. And ultimately we get to this word loose, which is to leave or to loosen. Here is the Wiktionary for it, if people didn't believe. I loose, I loosen, I untie, I slacken, I unbend. So life is loosened from him, almost the same way that he is loosened from the chariot itself. This is the noble way you can obtain a kleos in the idea of Homer, with words and poetry such as this. And then the other words to note, we have loose. This is again an elaboration upon loose that I was looking up. We can look for other words around there. This is Aeneas. We know that because we know the alphabet. So just above here, we will see life. Anthi, Luthi, Fugite, Menoste. Menos, you click on it. This is the might and force which drain from him, his life. And then this should be the cold. But we know it's not that invocation of the cold. We know it's the second meaning, which is fuchi, which is his life. So his life literally drains from him. Anti luthi fuchi te menos te. Life and spirit left him there. Now this escalates quite quickly. We're only in 5295 when Diomedes kills Pandarus, and this is about how Kleos can very quickly become hubris. You try to take on a god yourself. In 5295, he's killed Pandarus. By 5360, he's trying to take on Aphrodite. I've been stabbed by a mortal. This is just after 5360, Aphrodite. I've been stabbed by a mortal, Diomedes, who is in a mood now to fight with Father Zeus himself. That's how quickly the escalation happens. Less than 65 lines. Book 5 also has these passages where Ares teams up with, again, what's called a godlike Hector. So we're beginning to see the fleshings. Again, we said in this is you can treat book 1 to 8 as Act 1, where we're establishing all of our characters before we would then return to the embassy of Achilles in book 9. So this is really where Hector enters the scene now in book 5. Described as godlike Hector, he begins to get Ares on his side. We've seen Diomedes go from the rank of a man who could take on Pandarus, achieve Kleos in battlefield, to hubris of taking on the gods. Now we're going to go to and try and sympathize a bit with the other side and Hector. Ares ultimately, though, is quelled by the hierarchy of the gods themselves, because by the close of the book, he has a little rampage and the Greeks are scared. But by the close of book 5, he is complaining to Zeus. And then Zeus replies, "You shifty hypocrite, don't come whining to me. I hate you more than any god on Olympus. Rivalry, war, fighting, these are the breath of life to you. Your mother Hera, too, has the same headstrong and ungovernable temper." So Zeus basically rules him out. So that hierarchy among the gods is important. Also, when Hector and Ares are routing the ships, this is their first callback to the idea that Achilles is required. The days when godlike Achilles came out and fought the Trojans never showed themselves in front of the Dardanian gate. They were too afraid of his massive spear. But now the Trojans are fighting far from the town and by your very ships. I also noted about this bringing in, and we're going to have this in book 6 when Hector goes back to Andromache, this fleshing out of the greatness of the other side. We've had the decadent, the Menos of Paris. But Hector is a different man altogether than Paris. And it's Homer giving greatness to the other side. This is the beginning in Western literature, the idea that the opponent can still be afforded the idea of greatness. Or greatness recognizes greatness even in an adversary, as Andrew Roberts states. Hence why he can write Napoleon the Great and feel justified in giving him that epithet, whilst still having wanted the British to take him on and achieve victory against him. Homer will do something similar here with Hector. He doesn't do it with Paris. Paris is decadent. But he will do it with Hector, because Hector, not only is he godlike, but we're going to see here a test of Hector's personality in the next 3 books. We have Hector going back to his home to have his final meeting with his wife Andromache, and then his son Astyanax. And that'll get compared against Paris. So we have this Parisian Hectorian dualism, which you can even see on in book 6, lines 320. The vanity of Paris. He found Paris in his bedroom, seeing to his superb armor. Again, remember we talked about the facade of the ornate armor. His shield and body armor. Examining his curved bow while Helen sat beside him. with her waiting women and supervise their excellent work. He's almost seeing we can almost picture Paris here seeing his image, his own image that he's obsessed with as much as anything else in his armor. Shades there of by the vanity, by the pool of Narcissus. It's your fault this town flares with the sound and fury of battle. Again, we have this idea of the sound and fury, which is obviously a translation nicely invoked by Rio. Hector, your taunts are justified, nothing more than I deserve. So Paris even knows at this point. But Hector takes on this responsibility to defend Troy nonetheless. Zeus surely has an evil end in store for us, says Hector, intending us to figure in the songs of people yet unborn. Again, we have this appeal for Kleos, but we also have a recognition in Hector here of knowing Kakon, Kakus. Kakun will be the noun of it. This something bad. Sorry, the adjective. Something bad. Right. Kakus was the maltreatment of the priest, but Kakun is also invoked here. Kakun moros. Moros being sort of fate. Kakun being a sad, or in this case, evil, almost an evil fate in store for us because of the actions of Paris. And again, you can use the same system as before to get that. I think if we go here, you can see hopefully where I am. Six, 3, 3, 2. On whom Zeus has brought an evil doom. So the fate, or the evil doom, the Kakun moros, which should be over here somewhere, just before line 60. Peri onos, peri Zeus, thika Kakun moros. And so, yes, he has these prophecies. I believe he also states later, of course, he raises up his child and tries to believe, does Hector, that his child will still live to see great days of Troy. So you have Hector believing in his child, looking into the image of his child, as opposed to Paris, who's looking into the image that comes from his own armor. And so not only does he look into his child and look to his future, does Hector, but he then looks to his own wife and tries to comfort her. He then goes off and in book 7 will fight Ajax, and this will be his first test on the battlefield, where he will recognize again the recognition of the greatness in the other. Hector will recognize the greatness in Ajax, and the Ajax is brought by lot to fight Hector because Hector is achieving such greatness in battle that the Greeks say, right, we will decide among the best among us, put your name into a lot because you all want the honor of fighting him. And whoever draws this lot will engage them in battle. They engage with each other, do Ajax and Hector, sometimes known as Ajax. But ultimately, again, Ajax is seen as Olympian born, this idea of the aristocratic hero worship. They have the exchanging of the gifts. That dear sons, give up now and break off the fight. Cloud gatherer Zeus holds you both dear. They both basically fight for so long that the clouds gather and night descends on them. Duel ends and gifts are exchanged. First, let's both exchange prestigious gifts so that Trojans and Greeks alike can say, these two fight each other in the soul-destroying combat, but were reconciled and parted friends. This is the first test of Hector. And again, this is the Hollywood film Troy seems to get this completely wrong. Hector goes out and kills Ajax. He also kills Menelaus in that depiction, which just makes no sense at all. Because although it does portray, you remember being a child, you do end up being sympathetic to Hector's position. But you should, when you're looking back on it now, and I've rewatched it up to that point, up till about the books 1 to 8, coinciding with this discussion, it's jarring when Hector kills Menelaus. It makes no sense for him to do so. Here, these trials that Homer actually gives Hector, he's deprived of Ares teaming up with him at the end of book 5, right? He loses the gods and becomes more of the man. In book 6, he goes home to his son and his wife. Book 7, he fights Ajax, recognizes greatness in the other, and so bids adieu, whilst exchanging gifts rather than killing. And then finally, we enter Book 8, which is Hector Triumphant. Now, all of this is going to be a foil to later acts. This is still only Act 1. We're establishing the characters. But all of this is going to be a foil to the petulance of Achilles that we have seen in Book 1. And so that's why Book 9 really starts the second act, because it's the embassy to Achilles. And again, we return to this idea of Achilles' rage, but on the backdrop of having seen Hector and having seen Diomedes and having seen all these other men tested on the plains of Troy, as plains of hero, where heroes can ascend or become beasts. Agamemnon also shows himself at the beginning at this point, this idea that they need to go to the embassy. He listens to Diomedes and Nestor. We're around like Book 8, line 150. When Nestor they're all in conference in Agamemnon's tent. And we have a Zeus thunderbolt that warns Nestor. Diomedes, quick, turn the horses round and get out of here. Don't you see that you can expect... Apologies, this is just before they're in Agamemnon's tent. They're still in the plains of battle, and they know they need to retreat here. Diomedes is still hubristic. He's being able to take on the gods, and he's still sort of the overly confident Diomedes of the Book 5. But Zeus sends out a thunderbolt to him to try and show him that he is still just a man. And Nestor, always the picture of wisdom, he is a guide to heroes rather than a hero himself, says, Diomedes, quick, turn the horses round and get out of here. Don't you see you can expect no help from Zeus? And here comes Diomedes' reply. All that, venerable sir, is very true, but it really hurts me to think of Hector standing up and saying to the Trojans, Diomedes ran away from me and did not stop till he reached the ships. Now this is how he'll boast, and when he does, may the wide earth swallow me up. Nestor, the Geranaean charioteer, replied, Son of mighty Tydeus, what are you saying? Hector can call you a coward and a weakling to his heart's content, but he won't convince the Trojans and Danaans, nor those proud shield-bearing Trojans, wives, whose strong husbands you've hurled into the dust. So Nestor is the counselor of wisdom. You've already achieved your fame for now. Do not overdo it by being a fool and staying out on the plain of battle too long. Because again, what will happen is the blood will seep out of the armor, and the man will be revealed. We're close to a rout at this point by the Greeks, and again, similar to Book 2, when Odysseus stopped them from going home after Agamemnon's dream, elite leadership stops the rout. Diomedes was followed by Agamemnon and Menelaus, these two by Ajaxes, clothed in martial valor. We are on Book 8, around line 260, where they're trying to stop the Greeks from entirely routing back to the ships. And more tests of leadership. Matchless Teucer replied and said, on line 290, Most glorious Agamemnon, why flog a willing horse? I'm doing all I can without stopping. This is, again, the test of leadership for Agamemnon. He's then has some people saying they're doing all they can, like Teucer, and he's having other people flocking back to the ships. None of this does Achilles have to contend with. And so, really, at this point, we've reached the end of Book 8, and we've established some ideas of the hero on the plains of Troy, that it can both elevate and desecrate, that there's a difference between the hero who is skilled in battle. He has his own torments, like Achilles. His stubbornness can overcome him, his pride. We have the leader, a king of kings, Agamemnon, who has to contain with the genuine machinations of army maneuvers. And we have the comparisons both between Menelaus and Paris, and also between Odysseus and the rich Trojans, the wealth of Troy against the humble man from Ithaca, but who has the cunning to ultimately end this war. And so hopefully you enjoyed this stream where I've talked about these different ideas in books 1 to 8, what I consider an Act 1 of the Iliad. And again, when we go forward to the plot of 9 to 16, which will end with the death of Patroclus, and then finally the third act, book 17 to 24, where Achilles will eventually take on Hector, we should have all of these foundations of our characters in mind. Till then.